This is the site of the Loro Gate in Athenry, County Galway, and just to kind of give a sense of Athenry and its riches, it's probably, and I'm saying this in Kilkenny, the best preserved Anglo-Norman wall town in Ireland. And I carried out this work while working in Howley Hayes, and Howley Hayes were involved with Athenry as part since 2009, and undertook 9 phases of conservation works to the wall town. And the Loro Gate is a sort of a small, modest part of that, which in some ways is kind of more instructive in terms of the themes of the conference, in terms of placemaking and community. And it's worthy of just getting a bit of a closer look, but within 10 minutes, which Liam has said that the maximum that I have allowed. So the Loro Gate was one of 4 of the original gates to Athenry. There was a map from the 16th century, the Brown map, that showed clearly 4 gates, and there's a later gate, the North Gate, that appears to not be original, a later addition in the late 16th or early 17th century. The Loro Gate is at the southwest corner. I suppose the gate most convenient to Galway City. And at the time of the first edition OS map, it was known as a Swan Gate after a local hostelry, as far as I'm aware. And this is a closer look at it at that time. And by the first edition, there's no visible standing remains of the Swan Gate, but obviously it was known about, and the road and path was as the medieval. This is a view of Athenry recently, today, from Google Maps. You can see that it has retained much of its medieval framework with the wall towns, town walls, very well preserved, but development following around the perimeter of the town walls with kind of, I suppose, out of town commercial developments and housing and industrial development in the close hinterland. And this is the Loro Gate as it appears there. And you just about see in this image the Loro Gate as it was found in about before the works commenced. It's still current on the image. On to the right is Kenny Park, which is the crucible of Galway hurling, and there's a small estate beside, just off the junction at the Loro Gate, which is named for the gate. It's Loro Gate. Just to give an example, the only upstanding remains of the gate remains in the town is the North Gate, which was recently conserved. So that was, largely rebuilt. There was large amounts were rebuilt in the 19th century probably, and also in as recently as the 1980s, when the east corner was rebuilt in cement. This is just this year we had funding to repoint and repair the arch and the murder hole. So this is a map showing the Loro Gate site of before the works. You can see it's essentially, there's a traffic island. To the left side is the original road, and then there's a wider road placed alongside the walls of the Kenny Park. But you can see from the dotted line the line of the town wall. And the town wall exists along the football ground, the GA grounds, and also within the site of Prospect House to the left side, or the west side, as a much lower wall. So in 2004 or in 2006, there was a number of different applications for the site close by. The first one didn't include the Loro Gate site as part of the development, but I understand the roads authority required that they provide a roundabout at the junction in order to get the level of development that they look for. And this did bring the Loro Gate into the purview, I suppose, of the development scheme, but as a planning condition. And at this stage, Dominic Delaney Associates, the archaeologists, were on board, and they identified the Loro Gate was a potential to be discovered. And sure enough, when they started the works, after getting plan permission with no conditions attached in terms of archaeology, just through other than monitoring. The Loro Gate was discovered, and for mitigation was agreed was to create a kind of a concrete capping over it. You can see it there on the section on the right side, which are kind of indicating the Loro Gate and then the capping in and around it. But as you imagine from the date 2008 or so, the works stopped just at site development stage. So the local council were left with a kind of unbuilt and messy site that they had sort of taken in hand. This is an example, another beautiful example of the archaeologist's art of drawing by hand with careful attention to detail, and to make something that to the untrained eye would look like a pile of stones, but they can see the structure. And this is a very useful document throughout the development of the project. This is a view, I think this is still current, from Street View of the site when I soon prior to when I first encountered it. And you can see there on the right hand side the sign for Loro Gate superbly finished. That's for the housing scheme that never actually happened, but you can see that the site is in a pretty poor state, having been contaminated with builders' rubble and plastic sheeting and all the rest, and it was an eyesore. And as often the case, the local Tidy Towns Committee were very keen that this wouldn't be left in this state, and I suppose made their representations to the council. And just to say that Marie Mannion, the Heritage Officer, and Councillor Peter Feeney in Athenry have been instrumental through the 8 to 10 years that there has been projects in the walled towns, and they're without them, a lot of this would never have happened, or all of it. And this is another view that shows, I suppose, what we first thought was a part of, kind of the essential part of the project was, it's invisible when you walk around, you have to walk up close to see it. So there's kind of the current, well, the horizon at the time, with just there's these small medium roundabouts that no one likes, and it's not visible from that perspective. But from here, along the footpath, you can see it just kind of rising into view with Kenny Park in the background. This is as it stood at the time. So again, as I say, highly contaminated site. And one fine example of a dress stone was the spud stone that related to the previous gate, which was a remarkable find to have that among all the rest. And this is another photograph that's very telling in terms of the kind of the datums that we're working with in terms of how to present this monument. So our first view is that it would be much easier to actually rebury it in the sense of preserve it in situ, create a mound and some, I suppose, as like an interpretive board. But the community were very keen that it would be presented, and that presented an opportunity as well as a lot of challenges in terms of how it could be presented and conserved and landscaped in a sensible way, and to give it some meaning and prominence. This is kind of an earlier sketch where instead of thinking about a mound, we think about maybe a hollow or a dip, so that we slope the traffic island, as it were, to meet the mound, to meet the gate fragment, and to just do some low-key signage at the base of it, so that wouldn't dominate the fragment. And after going to site then about 6 weeks later, having met with the department and everybody who had been involved, the archaeologists, it was very clear that it was a much more complex site and there was much more complex restrictions on what we could do. But that also fed into, I suppose, in kind of improving the kind of richness of the project in some ways. You have to kind of work with the grain to really kind of find the richness of the project. In this case, there was broadband ducting, access covers, access to a house, all these things that constrained the site, and then also a redesigned roundabout that RPS had developed for Galway County Council, which meant that this roundabout didn't have to disturb the remains, and this was the opportunity. And this scheme here is showing the dish, as we discussed, in terms of the grassy kind of hollow rather than a mound, presenting the fragment, and then the addition of a sort of river cobble surface along the original alignment of the road, which in this case was becoming part of a kind of a no man's land between the monument and the existing footpath. So we had developed a three-phase strategy, and the first phase was archaeological resolution, so we had to do some more, Dominic Delaney again had to do more excavation to understand the full extent of the monument, and also we had to remove a gas pipe that had been installed there in modern times. Now that it's exposed, we were concerned that it would corrode and cause problems in the future. So this, you can see the pipe, the either end, and here you can see the broadband, which obviously is of recent date, but went right through what was the remains of the wall town, and so that's the archaeological phase, and then we turned to do the conservation phase. So here we were trying to do this kind of a very strange thing, in the sense that trying to weather this fragment in a way that didn't lose its authenticity, but also we had to refill the kind of the channel that had been placed between the two sides of the gate pier, to allow water to run off. We also wanted to make it so handy to be sitting on as well, in terms of, we thought it would be kind of antisocial kind of place to do that. So we it was through very kind of careful discussion with the mason about how best to place the stones to make sure it weathered and also presented it correctly. And there was a lot of discussion about the placement of the spud stone that we wanted to keep in situ. And this is an example of the wall. Only about 700 mil of the wall was the base of the wall was visible, and that was repointed using lime mortars. This is the view through here. And that was the first two. That was the archaeological phase. Then the second phase was the conservation phase, which is piggybacked on a wall town's phase of conservation. So nothing was kind of done in of itself. And then the third phase was the landscaping phase, which was piggybacked on the roundabout job. So we had to kind of arrange things so it would fit in with all those site restrictions. And we used Dominic Delaney's drawing in a number of ways to help illustrate the project, something that was hard to describe sometimes, especially for contract documents. And this is the landscaping drawing showing the proposal. So what we were conscious about was, there was obviously in the public realm there was issues with a drop at the step that we wanted to draw attention to, but we also wanted to reinstate the boundary, to reinstate the alignment of the wall in this gap, and to kind of, so that the eye would be drawn to the fact that there's a fragment under the foot, under your feet, but also it was part of a larger whole. And this is the outcome. So we weren't able to oversee the works on site, but the contractors did a good job of the landscaping. This is the cobble surface. So the guarding became something, we tried to do something that was kind of abstract, so it didn't detract from the stone fragment, but also keeping the amount of interpretation to a minimum. So just in this case, you review the name of the gate, its position on the network of the wall alignment, and also a very short description of the gate. And that's really what we're trying to do, and something that's of very kind of small in scale, that was quite successful, in terms of what sometimes the local community pressing for doing something that you thought wasn't the most likely approach turned out to be the richer one, and the special one, that delivered something quite interesting. And this is just a kind of example of, this is just to kind of say about all that has been achieved in the 9 phases. So almost over half a kilometre of town wall, 2 of the gates, Loro and the North Gate, which is in the first phase, 4 mural towers and a guardhouse. But that's one aspect of it. But the other aspect, obviously, is all the works that the Irish Wall Towns Network have done in terms of community engagement. And I certainly believe that, in terms of the placemaking, this is something that created a place out of a traffic island in a town which has such a large richness of upstanding walls and structures. It was lovely to be involved in a project where something that was less tangible underfoot could also get the same degree of interest. And there's no doubt in my mind that part of that care and the kind of commitment from the community comes from the kind of softer things of creating these events alongside with the castle and the walls as the background can create some kind of rich responses from even a roundabout job. Thank you.